Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I find it rather interesting that in the course of almost a 3-hour debate, we've not heard anyone speak up against the notion of the claim of right. But I would caution colleagues against being deluded by any faux agreement on this matter, because I am confident there are many members of this chamber, not here tonight present, who would find it presumptuous, indeed, they would find it very presumptuous that a group of citizens in one part of this island should assert the claim to be able to control their own destiny. And they would do that because they regard this as a single nation. And they regard the people of Scotland, whilst important, as having no other rights than the people of the West Midlands or East Anglia. I'm pleased, I think, to recognise that most contributors to the debate tonight realise that the basis of our constitution is different than that. And in fact, we may have a single polity, but we have a multinational country which is based on serial acts of union that bring its component parts together. Because once we understand that, then the claim of right itself has to be the intellectual corollary of that position, because a union can only be maintained by consent. And if the people of Scotland do not therefore give their consent to maintaining it, it will naturally fall. Now, this idea of popular sovereignty of the people of Scotland is quite an old-fashioned one. In 2 years' time, we celebrate the 700th anniversary of the Declaration of Arbroath. And that is a document worth looking at. It was, in fact, a letter from the nobles of Scotland to the Pope at the time, asking for him to intervene, and much of the language is archaic and much of it is reverential. But yet in there is the grain of something that was never before expressed. It says clearly that if the King of Scotland does not represent the wishes of the people, then the people will find themselves a king who will.
Hear, hear.
It is the first expression in modern times of the notion of popular sovereignty.
Hear, hear.
Now, that idea has ebbed and flowed over the 7 centuries in between. 300 years ago, it inspired the dissenters who were resisting the fledgling union because they felt it was a matter of being sold out by the Scottish aristocracy. 200 years ago, it fueled people like the friendly societies, people like Thomas Muir, who were working for popular democracy and universal franchise. 100 years ago, it motivated the Red Clydesiders and people like John Maclean. The idea of Scottish popular sovereignty has always been consistent throughout the centuries, but never more so than the present day, and never more so than 20 years ago, when the 1998 Scotland Act, for the first time in all of those centuries, actually asked the people what form of government they would like. And they said, by a massive majority, 3/4 of them voted to establish the Scottish Parliament. Now, the reason why we bring this debate here tonight about the claim of right for Scotland is because we believe that devolution settlement itself is very much under threat, and we wish to alert this chamber and this country to what is going on. The Secretary of State for Scotland says there is no power grab. In fact, there's a powers bonanza. The member for East and Buckinghamshire, in a previous debate, listed a whole range of topics that would become the responsibility of the Scottish Parliament after Brexit. But we misunderstand if we think that responsibility is the same as power. Because what is happening at the same time as these areas of responsibility being transferred to the Scottish Parliament is that the Scottish Parliament's ability to do anything about them is being limited and constrained like never before. It is intended that in so many areas, not just the ones transferring from Brussels, but areas which are currently the exclusive competence of the Scottish Parliament, it is intended that in the future these will be subject to UK-wide frameworks. Now, we don't yet, and I see today's fishing white paper does not yet have an idea as to exactly how these frameworks might work. We have so far been talking about the principle, but it's the principle that's important. Picture a UK-wide committee to talk about fishing policy. The interests of Scottish fishermen will be represented by the Scottish Government, likewise Welsh and Northern Irish. But who will speak for the fishermen of England? Well, that will be DEFRA. That will be a committee and a department of Westminster who will do that. and at the same time, if there is a divergence of opinion or a difference of view, then it will be DEFRA who will determine what actually happens. And that means not a partnership. That means that the devolved administrations will be subject to and subservient to the will of the majority. And the Secretary of State may say that Scotland is part of the UK, but I tell him Scotland is not part of England. And effectively, that is what that arrangement would lead to.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, we talked about 2000. So, is there an intervention coming? We talked about
I would just like to take issue with the honourable gentleman's statement of Scotland not being part of England, when in fact Scotland has never been, or certainly in the life of this Parliament, never been part of England, and that is not what the Secretary of State said.
No, I think he might have prepared that better. And the point I was making is that, in effect, it will make Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, for that matter, subservient to the will of the government in this place. And that is contrary to the whole spirit of devolution. 20 years ago, when the architects of devolution, Donald Dewar in this House and John Sewell in the other, were framing the proposals, they understood the need to try and make sure that this was seen as a genuine commitment to the decentralisation of political power. Therefore, they enshrined a principle that said that if there are matters devolved to the Scottish Parliament, then this place will not interfere in those matters and will not determine anything about them without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. That principle has stood for 20 years and not been challenged across the House. And yet last week, Mr. Speaker, we made history. For the first time, a piece of legislation in the United Kingdom became law, which required the consent of the Scottish Parliament, which was not given. And that is a problem for everyone, and it will have to be addressed. Many members have questioned our motives in bringing this debate. I fear we're running out of time, so I won't take his intervention. Many members have talked about the referendum of 2014 and the idea, and my leader expressed this so well in his opening remarks. For those 15 hours on the 18th of September 2014, sovereignty was genuinely in the hands of the people of Scotland. Yeah. They had a choice to make between two alternate futures, and they chose one. Now, I don't agree with the choice that they made, but I fully respect it, and I respect it completely as a decision that they took. But I tell you this, in the same way that a dog isn't only for Christmas, sovereignty isn't only for the 18th of September 2014. Sovereignty means that you have the ability to change your mind if the circumstances around you change. You have the ability to adapt and take a new view. And the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland said, as my honourable member for Edinburgh South West has commented, she asked us to imagine a situation where a Scottish Parliament might be elected, where a majority of its members had stood on a manifesto suggesting that the people should be consulted in a referendum, and if that majority were then to vote in the Scottish Parliament and that to become the policy of the Parliament, it would be inappropriate for this Parliament to stand in its way. That was her suggestion, and I agree with it. The problem is that I say to her, this is not a matter of hypothesis for the future. This is real. 26 months ago, that is exactly what happened in the Scottish general election, and a mandate was sought for and a mandate was given. And as others have said, that mandate is extant, but it will be for the judgment of the Scottish Parliament to determine when the dust settles on this Brexit mess that we are currently in, whether or not they believe it is in the best interest of the people of Scotland that they be consulted again on their constitutional future, and whether they wish to remain part of an isolationist United Kingdom, or whether they wish to be part of opening up to the world and playing their role as an independent country. And that day will come, and the claim of right for Scotland means that the people will have their right to exercise their decision on that matter when that time comes.
Thank you. Minister Stuart Andrew.